Hey, this is John Chen, and we're here on another amazing, engaging virtual meetings podcast. This weekend was the debut of something I've been calling hybrid in a box. And so I now have a box container. I'm able to roll it into a venue, and in about 30 to 60 minutes, I am ready to live stream. And live stream, I did this last week. I live streamed a meeting which doubled the audience. We went from 50 to 100, 50 in person and 50 now virtual, and really got a chance to help out. In this case, it was a church, so they had a great fundraiser, and so by doubling the audience, that's an immediate return on investment for them. The second one was here on my cultural side. Was Saturday was a 5,000 plus person attended for in person at Seattle Center, the API or Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Heritage Month. Make sure and check out the live stream that is out on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/engaging virtual meetings. And I'm about to release a second video that has even cleaner video. But by the way, this year using three matching cameras with three different lenses with some new equipment, including a zoom lens that allowed me to, even though I was 300 feet back, to get this view of a speaker on stage. Try that on your Zoom. All right. Meanwhile, I've got an amazing person here, and she's our next guest for this video, which is really cool too. She gave me her stuff early, which means that we can actually put the information out there. And so the stream has been floating out there for over 2 weeks about this person. She's a professional speaker, a writer, and a host of the Blissful Hiker podcast. 66,000 downloads, right? I'm about 65,000 behind you. An award-winning flutist. She'll tell me in a second. Syndicated American Public Media radio host, and the solo female middle-aged titanium reinforced. She gave me this long-distance backpacker known as the Blissful Hiker. Please put your hands in the air for the one and only Alison Young. There we go. Allison and I were jamming too to "Fast Car" by Tracy Chapman, and she goes, "I love that song. Just keep playing it."
Keep
How you doing,
playing it.
Allison?
It's so good to see you, John. Thanks so much for having me on your program. Yeah, I'm a professional backpacker, titanium reinforced long distance backpacker, a professional, I guess. And so I am also a speaker, and flutist was correct. I do a lot of different things. Great to be here.
Great to be here too. All right, I'm gonna dive in. All right. Well, first off, titanium reinforced talk.
Okay, so it runs in my family, osteoarthritis, and I never expected it. I was always active my entire life, never did anything like an injury or anything like that. And I don't know, right before COVID, or I guess we were getting into COVID a little bit after I'd gotten back from hiking 5,000 miles, I started to have this kind of weird pain in my leg. And now I know that, like, if you get this kind of, it almost feels like a pull in the inner part of your thigh. I just thought I pulled a muscle. And I was kind of ignoring it. And I'm like, I'm going to go to a PT and not think anything about it. And I go to finally someone to have an X-ray. I go to an orthopedic surgeon, and he comes out and he says, "You don't have any cartilage left in your hips. They're gone. It's in both of them." And I'm like, "What?" I said, "I just went 5,000 miles. I've just pulled a muscle." And he said, "No, that's actually what happens, is that you start to feel it there." So sometimes this happens. You get arthritis, and it's just not one of those things that takes a long time to show up. It just hits you. And so during COVID, that's how I passed the time during COVID, was to have my hips replaced. But I'm back to walking. And interestingly enough, I mean, I don't do a lot of my public speaking, or I should say my professional speaking about my hip replacements. But a lot of people do write me, and then they say, like, "Oh, you're giving me hope," and they have questions to ask, and, kind of like a list of things to do to kind of keep going when your body breaks down on you.
Well, your whole brand is built around this blissful hiker, and if you had to stop hiking, I think it would kind of be a bummer, right?
I wouldn't really be blissful, right?
You
So
could, you could be
blissful's
the
kind
wait,
of a
wait, you could be the blissful couch potato like the rest of us.
Right. Well, hiking, okay, so walking. So I'm blissful, of course, is kind of an aspiration, right? So I mean, it sort of comes, follow your bliss and all of this. It comes, sort of religious space, kind of faith, looking for something that gives you a sense of being totally connected to the person you're supposed to be, all of those good things. And for me, walking my entire life, not always backpacking long distance, but always walking was a way to solve problems, was a way to get in touch with the spirit, was a way to feel grounded, quite literally. So that's why I hike, and that's why I aspire to continue walking, and I encourage other people to do the same thing. But yeah, blissful couch potato. I mean, isn't it more fun? What do they say that like electrons seek like the lowest energy form or something? There's some sort of scientific reason for like being relaxed instead of moving. But interestingly enough, kind of going back to this whole thing about replacing my hips, and people writing me and asking how they keep moving, and
Yeah.
and say that you're sort of an inspiration. I mean, I say things like you have to have all of these kind of mantras as you age, that you're going to be going slower. You can't compare yourself not only with anybody else, but you can't even compare yourself with your young self. You have to be thinking, kind of like, this is where I am now. What can I do within this? You can still set goals, you can still have plans, but you're not, you may not be the person with the kind of ease of movement that you used to be.
So again, I don't know if you read my bio too, right? I actually have 3 attempts on Rainier, 5 attempts on Rainier, 3 summits, and a summit on Denali. So I know what you mean. I actually kind of want to dive into this mantra part, which people don't really know. Like, if you really like, I think many hikers have mantras, like things that they're saying in their head while they're actually climbing. Because I mean, one of the cool things that you can do while climbing or hiking is actually put yourself in meditative states, and actually makes the hiking go easier and a lot of things like that. So I'm just curious, like, do you have 1 or 2 mantras that you like to share, that maybe you use, especially on those really long hikes?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting idea, and I haven't quite thought of it that way, but that's really beautiful. I mean, really putting yourself into a state. I mean, especially when you're doing something like climbing a mountain. I mean, because has a very clear goal, and a real intensity of energy to get there. Of course, you always have to be reminding yourself of where your stopping points are. So one of the things I speak about as a professional speaker, is absolutely like the opposite thought around this idea of goal setting, or around this idea of getting to the top of a mountain and succeeding. I talk about like having the grit to quit, having the grit to say when I need to stop, when I need to turn around. And of course, in a place like Rainier, or any place that has high altitude, which has its own dangers, or weather, whatever it happens to be, clearly you have to have those kinds of, I guess you'd call them like outs, or what was the word that I was using before? All of a sudden, I can't think of it right now. They're goals that have kill criteria, essentially, that you're going to stop. For instance, you probably knew this from climbing Rainier, is that if I don't get to the certain point by a certain time, I really need to turn around, because coming down is so much more dangerous. So I do these talks, which a lot of people feel like it's completely the opposite of the way you should be if you're a long distance backpacker or a mountain climber, to get people into having this kind of power over all of the decisions they make. Because sometimes when you have one single goal and you are so focused on that goal, you can't see anything else. And
Right.
once you're in it, once you're in the wilderness, or you're in the weather, or whatever it happens to be, that's like the worst time to make a decision. So you want to have like some sense of as I said, the kill criteria, a sense of like making other options available, having sort of a list of, unless I'm going to go this far, unless this happens. And this, of course, relates. The reason I speak about it is because it relates to all sorts of things we do in life. I mean, any decision we make, business decisions, money decisions, buying a house, accepting a position somewhere, a job, marrying someone, we have to make decisions where we have so much unknown. And so when you have unknown, you have to become comfortable with that and feel what it's like to make a decision when you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. And that's one way to find out if I can get to the top of Rainier, is to keep going to the top of Rainier, even if all of the factors have changed. But to answer your question, I mean, these are some of the kind of the other intellectual things I try to kind of explore those. Yeah. I mean, you said you had 5 attempts on Rainier, and what you got up were clearly you had to give up, right?
For those who don't ever mountain climb, but you probably have done things like read the book Into Thin Air or watched one of the movies, there's nothing that replaces that moment in time where you have to make that decision, because you think it's easy. It's so easy here on ground level sometimes to make that decision. But when you are up there, right, there's all these factors of like, I may never come up here again, right? There's the I quit, right? There's all the
Yeah,
guilt
I'm a
that
failure,
yeah, I'm
right?
a failure. There's a whole bunch of other things. Like there's times when, which was great. I did once get hypothermia, and let me tell you, it is not fun, right? But
You're just shaking. Yeah, it's hard to control.
well, what's weird is like I wasn't shaking. I didn't know, but what I did, I was wearing a heart rate monitor, and so what I did find is that my heart rate went anaerobic at a time when I'm like, this. I don't normally go anaerobic, so I was up here at 190, and it wasn't until I got into the shelter, right, and then I got in, and then I started shaking.
Oh my gosh.
Then
Wow.
I go, oh my God, now I know what's happening. I'm having hypothermia, and I like on a down minus 50 down sleeping bag with a minus 50 down sleeping jacket with gloves with hats, and like just went back and tried to just warm myself back up, and I was able to do it. I want to share this piece here. One of my very good friends, Annie Duke, who's an author, wrote a great book called "The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away," and that. She's a professional poker player.
Yeah, I love her book.
Oh yeah, and I
She's
got a chance
like
to
my
actually,
heroine. Yeah.
yeah, I handle her and went by hours in a car with her, and she blew my
Oh
mind.
my gosh.
And
Wow. That's
I'm a poker
amazing.
player, right? I'm a big poker player too, and but that power of walking away, I think is so important. And other stuff, and I do think there's a part, right? So, but mine is we spend our life learning pain tolerance to get something done, and then
Mhm.
we spend pain feels like, so we'll stop doing shit that we're not supposed to do.
Who's
That's my quote. I made that quote.
That's fantastic.
Thank you
I
so
love
much.
that.
You credit me for
Shit
that.
that we shouldn't do. Yeah, that's really great. I mean, I think that one of the things that's really important about this, I mean, I'm talking about like these sort of extreme situations, and Annie Duke kind of goes into that too. A lot of the examples she uses are the outdoors. Of course, there's many others in there as well, but some of them seem really quite extreme. But I like to granular level for just sort of simple things. So like when I talk about the fact that I've had my hips replaced, and and I'm almost 60, and my body has problems, but I still want to be a through hiker. And it's like, well, how do you manage that? And it's like, well, you create goals differently. You set your sights in a different way. And I like to think of setting systems rather than goals, because goals sometimes end up being things like big, hairy, audacious, one-time things. I'm going to climb this entire mountain, and if I don't get to the top, like I have no meaning in my life or whatever. I mean, you don't say that, but that's sort of almost the energy that you put on it. And it's really difficult to say, I'm going to get to this point, and when I get to that point, it's another success. And sometimes those are the only successes we can have for numerous reasons that are out of our control. But taking these kind of bite-sized goal setting and setting sort of a system of goals, I think leads to more success and more, kind of more in touch with the present moment. To me, this question about a mantra I would take. I think the
Yeah.
most important mantra of all, to live in the present moment as much as you can, to be kind of quip of like, yesterday's history, tomorrow gift. That's why they call it the present. Step you're taking a priority. Um, but it loosens you from of whatever it happens to be, getting to that goal or competing with someone else, or I have to be at this place in my life, whatever it is, moment. And you release that to sort of in whatever the present moment's giving you. And there's like other pieces that evolve from that. I mean, they come from, like, if you have a spiritual faith, a sense of letting go and a sense of allowing whatever it is, the day to unfold, God to intervene if you're a person who believes in God or uses God as sort of your centering persons or
I,
centering.
I I heard all that, but Allison, I didn't hear what are some Allison's rules for giving up?
My rules for giving up.
Yeah. I want to know. I'm curious. What's the signal marker of like I should be done with this?
Right. Well, I mean, that's a good question. And I mean, I think it really depends on the circumstance. So oftentimes the story I use when I discuss this particular topic with people who are not outdoorsy people, but people who like Annie Duke talks to, who are businesses or such, I use the story of being on Aconcagua. And you may have had this experience too, because you're at night on the side of Aconcagua. And for those of you who don't know what Aconcagua is, it's the highest into the death zone region, which is an area you just can't spend a lot of time in because our bodies are not physiologically designed to spend time there. And I was getting headaches. I was feeling sick. I wasn't doing well. And that night, I started hearing in the tent on the side of the mountain in the snowstorm, I started hearing crackling in my lungs. And I knew that that wasn't good. It wasn't a cold. It wasn't, bronchitis. It's the strangest sound you've ever heard. It's the sound of your lungs filling with fluid. So my lungs were creating an edema, which is basically deadly. And so obviously that would be like it was nighttime, it was snowing, and I couldn't leave right at that moment. And I'm incredibly grateful that I was able to leave the next day. I didn't have a brain which can cause you to go unconscious, rescue you, hopefully. But I was able to get out. But what was so interesting to me is that when I was finally safe and out of the entire experience, I didn't feel relief. I felt kind of this perplexity and this kind of ungroundedness. Like, had I had the right attitude, had I, stuck with it, somehow I still could have gotten to the summit, which is absurd because high altitude pulmonary edema and high altitude cerebral edemas are deadly, and they can be. So it's almost like a no brainer. But there's so much pressure, and this is where something has just become so unhappy. And then you start to ask yourself, happy? And it's like, I have 100% certainty it will.
That's an Annie Duke, and you like have the worst hand ever here.
I mean, it could be, it's been a couple of, there have been experiences with people I've known in my life who I've had relationships with where you space to be in.
Right. Oh
That's
yeah.
really, really difficult, especially when you
Mhm.
really care about, or they're in your, whatever it happens to be, or someone you work with or whatever. I mean, these are all just like, I will never talk to you again. I mean, it's not these extremes. Sometimes it's just a matter of shifting,
Step away.
your connection to them. But one of the things that backpackers say all the time that I find, this is a great mantra.
Hmm.
And this actually probably goes to your very first question
But
about like, what is a mantra that keeps you going? And one is never quit on a bad day. And now that's like different from an extreme situation coming up, like Annie Duke talking about getting a hand that's, just like a 2 and a jack or something that you can do nothing with. I don't
right.
play poker, so I don't know if maybe that is a good hand.
Two seven, by the way, is the worst hand. 2-7.
2-7. Okay, so there you go.
You can use that
Um,
now in your talk.
I'll use that in my talk. Or so where was I going with this? Oh, so like those are kind of, when you're handed something, like you have an illness, or you have, a storm, or you have a situation that's untenable.
Yeah.
Clearly it becomes, I have to create the kind of grit around it. So that's where I like to work with people, to develop these discerning qualities, so that when those situations, in which they invariably do, they come up,
Yeah.
you're more easily able to let go and able to make that decision, rather than being in the field and you haven't even considered it, or you haven't gone over it. But some of the more vague ones, the vague ones are things like, this job, I don't know if this job's going to get better, or this relationship's going to get better, or this day hiking. I have this wonderful video. I don't know why I did this. I shot a video and did a selfie, which is kind of unlike me.
Yep.
And I'm crying. I've broken down. I've lost it on a through hike. So I'm in New Zealand, and it's day 100. And it's actually pretty weather. There's nothing wrong. It's not like I'm getting rained on or attacked. Nothing to the end of my rope. And I'm crying and I'm like, just bull. And then I kind of laugh at myself.
Oh,
And
this is
that is such a great example of like, don't quit on a bad day. I mean, you need to see if a good night's rest, if better food, if taking a break can just shake.
hard things too, which is you never know that. I don't know if there's a right answer. There's only a right answer for you. Like I'm gonna either put all my energy into healing it, right? Or there's this other side. Sometimes you just need to let go and let the earth do its process. And I don't know what the right answer is, but here's a great example from one. Okay, on Denali. At 15,000 feet is what's called the crux, all right? And every climb has what's called the crux, which is the hardest part of the climb.
Yeah.
And this one goes straight up a mountain, 3,000 feet. It's got two fixed lines, one up and one down. And basically, a storm came in for 3 days. So
Hey,
everyone piled up in this 15,000 foot platform, right, waiting to get up the crux because the weather's so bad that nobody can go. So finally, the weather gets good, and so everyone gets in. We could actually get in probably like in the first third. We're pretty early. What happens is we start getting up the line, and then about halfway up the wall, line comes to a dead stop.
ooh.
Right, this is I-5. There is a traffic jam on this fixed line, all right, and it's getting worse. And so now you're dressed in a way where like you're expected to be generating all this heat, and now you're not.
You're frozen. Yeah, because you're stopped.
Yeah, because you're stopped, and you can't do anything because you're on a wall, so you can't get another jacket out. Otherwise, you drop your stuff, and it's going to drop another 2,000 feet. And
Eesh.
so, and then the best part happens, Allison. The stuff you can't control. The storm moves back in.
No.
So
Oh,
now it's
it
like,
sounds like from John Krakauer. I
oh,
mean,
I
it's
know, I know. It's like it
fantastic
was
stuff.
sunny, and then all of a sudden, and now the storm came back. We finally get to the top, but we're still like crawling, right? Like going so slow, and we get around to this one spot, and now it's whiteout. We can't see anything, and our guide finally says, "I'm gonna call it." Everyone get off the rope. We're building a camp here, right? So we got off the rope and we built a camp. And for anybody who's ever put up a tent in 55-mile-per-hour winds or greater, there's a whole drill. Like you got to stick everything down. Anything you let go of goes like
That's it.
you're
Yeah.
gone, right? You won't have that for the rest of the trip. And so we do that, and then they bring us food instead of us eating in a communal area. They bring us food, and finally, at some point, like me and the other person in the tent, we're like, we got to go to the bathroom, right? We just got to go. And so we open the door, and all of a sudden, this massive whiteout storm has turned into complete peace and calm
Whoa.
because the storm moved below us.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the most beautiful sight you've ever seen. It was now sunset. It was dark. We started early in the morning, and now it's like 3, 4 o'clock. Sun is setting, right? You can see the moon and the mountains, and it is the most awestruck. And the best part about this is like the highlight of the trip, not the summit for me, was
Mm.
this moment of contrast of complete whiteout, and then having probably one of the most peaceful, serene, beautiful mountain views, like out of a movie. And that just really like it was really interesting because this guide has 16 out of 18 summits on a mountain that has about a success rate of about 30%.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, is that luck or he makes very good decisions?
That's a luck and experience.
Luck and experience.
Right. And so, he has a certain strategy, goes at a certain time, and that's how he can. This is the best part, too. We're talking about when you meet people who are like 60 to 90% successful versus people who are 30% successful. These people both might look successful to you, but you got to figure out who's got the better odds, right?
True. Right. Right.
And so, I just think that's a great example of like we quit right, for that moment, and that actually turned out to be the right decision. Oh, here's the last kicker, though. I forgot to tell you the last part. We go out to go to the restroom, and all of a sudden we look out like 100 feet in either direction. The cliff drops off 3,000 feet. We're camping on a ledge, and we didn't know it, right? Because we're in a whiteout. You don't know anything in a whiteout.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It was terrifying and exhilarating all at the same time. Going, oh, this
Yeah.
is what happened, right? Now that you get is like a reveal. Speaking of reveal, I just launched my podcast, and now you have this Blissful Hiker podcast. I would love to hear your journey to create the podcast, and of course, what you feel like some of your most successful tips are for podcasting for all the podcasters out there.
Okay, sure. I can share that with you. I want to make one comment about what you just said,
Ooh, please.
because just real quick, one of the things that I like to teach about is, yes, we want more success. We want more success in life, but that moment that you speak about, I mean, I won't forget that. I can sort of see it in my mind's eye,
Right?
suddenly coming out and everything being clear. Those are the moments that we want in life. And those are the moments we want in everything we do, are these moments that are maybe unexpected, and you have to be sort of experienced in that moment, and made precious as many opportunities for them. So some of them, I mean, I've had hundreds of experience, thousands of experiences like that, but
Yeah.
they're not as dramatic, right? So it's just small things, but it's when the day was terrible, but then there's this beautiful thing that happened because I took a different path, or I went a different way, or I went slower, or I changed my attitude, or whatever it is. So that's, I would just say that, just to kind of conclude the whole topic, is to really stay more true to what matters goal, and I think that you can have more success.
I have to follow on that because I did for two
We could
years.
talk all day.
For 2 years, I ran,
Oh,
right?
wow.
And I know these, we're talking about cliche metaphors, so let's just finish the top one, which was, right, is on, I ran it was 2 years, and we brought 23 leaders from around the world and brought them to Rainier, and run they did. And the whole point about the trip is not to stand on the summit, it was to stand on your summit.
Oh, yeah.
And my first attempt is that the summit was the most anticlimactic summit I have ever had. You ever had that?
Yeah. What did I waste all this time and money
Actually,
for?
yeah, why did I? Yeah, like the snowboarders out here. This is the dumbest I've ever thought about, right? It's like that. But turns out all the best moments, if you change the question from "Why the hell did I do this?" to what were my favorite or what were my personal best moments during this point, the whole thing experience changes. And I think the other part too, Allison, that I think I heard you say is that these moments happen to people, but if they're so focused on the goal, they don't ever feel them or see them or experience them.
Right. And you miss opportunities. I mean, that's really the point of making this kind of conversation to teams or to businesses, is
Yeah.
that you can't see another opportunity or another way to see, like, how to make this project work, or that Annie Duke talks about as monkeys and pedestals. You spend too much time building things that are easy to do, and you forget the hard parts. And if you're if you do that too much, you sort of lose your objective or perspective. But to
Okay.
answer your question, we can change the
That's it.
subject to, so
Speaking of
I have
podcasts,
over
that's right.
70,000 downloads. I just checked now, on Blissful Hiker podcast. And it is a very unusual podcast because, in addition to being a public speaker, or I keep saying public speaker, I'm not really a public speaker, I'm a professional speaker. In addition to being a professional speaker, I have experience as a syndicated radio host with American Public Media, which is a large radio, essentially, and internet provider of news and music, here in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is where I live, and professional flutist too. So I'm an artist as well. And over my life and over my career, I started to get very, very interested in sound and how we perceive things orally, how we hear sound, how it helps us bring us to a moment. And so I began creating these things I call audio narratives, which are essentially found sound. So birds, ice breaking, wind, people talking, whatever it happens to be. And my own personal essay. I'm a voice artist, so I record, mainly from my radio background, I record my voice reading them. I have a fairly relaxed, kind of calming storytelling voice. And so they're personal narrative, they're personal essay. So it's not really memoir, it's more describing an experience of how I'm seeing things, but you're hearing the story told with these audio cues, so all of the found sound is integrated, as though you're there. Plus I play my flute sometimes. I bring my flute in. It's not all the time, but anyway, the idea of the audio narrative, it just became so fascinating to me that I developed the podcast from that. I don't know very many people who do it that way. I mean, most people, it's like an interview. or they're talking to you and telling you, here's how to do such and so, or here are my tips for this and that. And I do a little bit of that, mostly with insightful things. I don't know. I think they're insightful. Maybe people are like flush, but things like what we're talking about right now. But I do it without being interviewed. I just sort of read a thought and kind of ask people for their opinion or ask their ideas. And most of those ideas, most of those questions come from followers. So people will write me and ask, how do I deal with this situation, or what do you think of this, or what of that, But anyway, so the upshot of it is that Blissful Hiker podcast is sometimes it's kind of hard to enter, I think, in the middle of it, but people do. They just find the story they like. New Zealand's long trail, it's almost 2,000 miles. And my journey, so it's thoughts that come in, it's sort of the experience. And I have the Arizona Trail, the PCT, or what else have I told? I'm looking over at my computer, just trying to remember all my stories. But anyway, I bring you into this kind of world of the outdoors. And so starting a podcast is a matter of just saying, I'm going to do this, and getting a podcast platform. I use Buzzsprout. I don't know. I'm not a spokesman for them or anything. I don't get any kickback.
I just started too. I'm paying too. So we're both non-paid. No money was taken for this.
No money was taken. Right. I mean, they say to you, you could get, because you have so many listeners, you could get, if you put ads on. I don't really want to do it that way, because I don't have any control over who the ads are. And I don't really like the sound of that. So I'm not doing that right now. I'm not sponsored that way. I'm sponsored through Patreon.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Patreon. Wait a second. I think I should do this though. I feel, because I have a great follow-up question now coming up on American Public Media Radio. Alison Young will do ASMR about crumpling paper for 5.
He picked up a piece of paper and crumpled it in his hands. John felt the sharp edge working into his palm as he crumpled it harder and harder, and felt all of the energy and the anger of the day loosened in that crumpled sheet.
Thank you. You've been listening to The Blissful Hiker on Public Media Radio. What's your view on ASMR, right? For those who describe ASMR for anybody who doesn't know ASMR.
What does it stand for? ASMR, I always forget. I have to look it up. Let me look it up.
Auditory,
AMSR.
sensory,
autonomous sensory meridian response. So I think they say that because it's something that automatically happens, like when you hear, and it's usually sounds like, or crumpling paper, cracking of eggs or of glass. I mean, but people use it for all sorts of things. It relaxes you. I don't really do ASMR. I mean, I guess you could say that's what it is, with like the sound of water moving. Because I'll have water in the background if I'm at a stream. Right. It can be very relaxing. I don't feel it's so much that as it's auditory clues to help you fill in the blanks of what you're seeing. So
this is like the alt text of audio, right?
Right. I mean, I love that, the alt text of audio. I should use that. When you were saying earlier that, how you were climbing and you were describing, that was 3,000 feet down and then we were in a whiteout. I mean, you're using these words to describe the place you were in. But if we heard more sound, if we heard the storm come and then the storm slowly disappear, and then the zzz of your tent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you heard, your friend, as you're speaking, your friend going, hey, what, you kind of hear in the background, John, it's cleared up. Can't believe it. You hear this kind of, mumbling. You don't really, but someone's talking, and it sort of pierces the essay. I mean, this is basically what people do in public radio. American Public Media is National Public Radio's challenger or whatever competition. That's basically what we do all the time. We tell a story and we bring you into a place, and really, really well told radio stories have not only interview elements, but oftentimes have the sound of the place they're in. And it just makes it really come alive.
Coming up next, Storms and Allison Young on the Blissful Hiker. I love that we're back into old school radio. Old school radio, which is like, and I love people who do that. They got like coconuts and crunchy noises and screwdrivers, and like they're able to like a snare drum. They're recreating all the noises from a movie part. So auditory means a lot to you, right? I mean, I think that's what I hear too. Is that you
Yeah.
value auditory? Again, I grew up in a family. My dad was. He was a doctor, but he really wanted to be a recording. He basically built a recording studio as a side hustle in my hometown of Stockton, California. Studio C. I didn't get paid to do that, but he did pay me to go to college. And
Got
so
that.
that's why I do really care about auditory, right? Auditory means a lot to me. Let's see if we can transition to other couple of questions here too. So the Blissful Hiker, I think, had to do a bunch of stuff virtual. Whether it's funny too that podcasting is really a form of a auditory virtual meeting. So I just love to hear, what has to happen for you in a virtual meeting for it to really be engaging for you as an attendee.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things is that when someone's leading something, they want to keep people from hiding, right? They want to make sure that everyone is involved in some way. And that's difficult to do because everybody has different personalities. So if you ask a real general question, you usually get like two people who are super engaged and then they take over, right?
I'm
So
one, by the way.
I
would
know.
be probably the other.
No, and it's difficult. I mean, I think as a presenter, it can be awkward because it can be, too much. I mean, it's like, okay, let's hear from someone else.
Right.
But as somebody who's also participating, it can be too much because it's sometimes hard to enter. And so I like to be on both sides of that so that I can really figure out when I do it, what has worked. And I love it when people ask questions, like they show a picture or something. It's like, can you figure out where this thing happened? Where's the trail? Something that's like, oh, I see it, that's kind of like a puzzle. And that's something we noticed too, whenever we had like the online component of what we did on air. Anytime you had a quiz, anytime you had something that people could just answer, they could click something, they always felt engaged. And I think that's a really great way to bring people in, to invite people. And that's really the whole point. I mean, if you're doing something virtually, you're not just standing there talking to them as a lecture, you're engaging them so that they don't just have you on mute while they're doing some other work. Whoever's doing that out there, shame on you.
Although, see, that's an accepted practice for podcasting.
What do you mean?
To do something else.
While you're listening to a podcast?
A lot of people, of course, they work out or they drive right now. I think of the
but that's different. But that's different.
See, that's different. That's what I'm saying. It's different. It's so different between the passive experience and like, this is a meeting, like you should be in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are really, really different. I mean, and I expect everyone. I mean, a lot of people talk to me and they say that they listen to my podcast while they're walking, which I love, which I'm so happy for because they say, oh yeah, it keeps me company while I'm exercising, while I'm doing the thing that you're talking about. So, I mean, it just makes my day. Of course, I mean, I have a really hard time, to be honest, turning on podcasts and just like sitting there and listening to it. That doesn't. I feel like I'm sort of not a sitter arounder kind of person.
Sitter around. Although you'll love my other one. I'm going to give a shout out to Miss Roberta up in Canada, and she loves to listen to podcasts, and she's drawing on her iPad while she's listening to your podcast. So maybe she'll send you a piece of art if I can get her to listen to one of your podcasts.
Thank you, Roberta. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, but that's different. I mean, she still is doing something. I mean, she's engaged in some way. I mean, for me, I love to walk, or I like to do I like to clean the kitchen while I'm listening to podcasts.
You can come over anytime, Allison. Come over anytime.
Isn't that horrible? I do not volunteer. I can't do anything like vacuum, right? Because I can't hear it. Or I guess you could have earbuds in.
Earbuds.
But yeah, I mean, I do think it's different, and I think engaging meetings is where the change happens. Because to be honest, my podcast is fairly. I don't ask for a ton of interaction. I mean, I guess I say, what do you think? Or love to hear from you, or has this ever happened to you? Or, tell me your ideas.
Yes.
But there's no point in the podcast where it's like, I'm like, turn off the podcast right now and write down the 7 things that, come
That's a Tony Robbins trick. Did you know that's a Tony Robbins trick?
Oh, that's a Tony Robbins trick.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
early on in Tony's career when what is it, Power Within or whatever, like the number one tape series that went on Guthrie Rankery that launched him, he would tell you to turn off the tape right now and like go journal these things, and then he would make fun of you. He'd be like, "I saw you. You didn't hit pause. Go ahead and stop now. Right? I can see you." Right? He would make funny stuff
Okay.
like that. It
I
was
can't
funny.
stand that. All right. That's just me. That's my problem. I wouldn't respond well to that. But I mean, I guess on the other hand, if they have said something really important, it's like you want to write it down or you want to do something with it. But sometimes I'm just kind of listening.
I'm in the flow.
I'm in the flow. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Don't
but you're
mess
right.
around.
It's like, how do you, I mean, I know that I do show notes. I almost call them program notes, like a
Mhm.
musician would, but show notes, so it says, here are the 5 things you learned and, da, da, da. And here's the article that I'm referencing. So if you want to read it or if you want more information, um, but like how many people really use those? I don't
No,
know.
let me give you two parts. So I'll give you two. So shout out to Deborah Eckerling, who does create show notes because she does summarize every podcast saying, you too long to listen to the whole thing, click this button and you'll get all the top points in one page. That's pretty impressive. That's actually,
That's really impressive. Yeah.
and the
Awesome. I mean,
second
I
one,
do, I do show notes, but I like how she does it. That's great.
so the second one is Miriam Hadness has a podcast about facilitation on virtual, and she has created an overlapping map and placed every episode on this gigantic mural where the episode lies in like these top skills like virtual facilitation, tips and tricks and initiatives. And so you can actually look on the chart, right, and say, I want to listen to that podcast. And I'm like, oh, that's out of control. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Uh,
That's very organized. That's awesome. I mean,
so
I
that
think that things are quite like mine's a little more like, woo,
all
we're
over. I know. Well, we'll
yeah.
lead you to this then. What do you think the future of virtual is, right? You are a professional, look, I said the word, professional speaker. You're on the circuit, right? You probably have delivered both in-person, virtual, hybrid. What do you think the future of virtual meetings is coming up?
I mean, I think that it has a wide open future. I think it's going to continue. I think it's going to become almost expected. I don't think anyone's going to be able to anymore say that I only want to be in person. They'll be pretty much required to have hybrid because we're so worldwide now, and people aren't even going into the offices anymore. So I think that the future is that it'll continue. So we have to get really good at it and keep people listening and keep people interested and intrigued. And I mean, I guess it's really important to have something up on the screen. You share your screen or whatever. You have to be a good speaker. You have to be somebody who's engaging and stuff, but you have something on the screen that's really valuable. So people either take, a screenshot or they'll have something to take away. It's like, after this, you have these notes. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, this goes, and that's great. By the way, side note, Allison, I invite you to come join me and the organizer, Rick Altman. I'm the virtual MC for a conference called the Presentation Summit. All right,
Nice.
so
Okay.
I do get compensation for the virtual MC, but I don't get compensation for mentoring the conference, the Presentation Summit, and you know, and I stress your importance again. If we just go back to this here for a second, about think about what visuals you're presenting, right? Because and they should be an ad, not a detriment, right? This screen should not have 5,000 words on it. That's like not an ad. That's a detriment.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but
Right.
but inspiring graphics, right? And again, the slide doesn't have to say what you're going to say. In fact, it shouldn't.
Mhm,
It should
mhm.
do something else, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And
to a degree. I think that if you are absolutely like, one of the things I'm working on right now are these it's called stepping into joy.
yeah,
And it's very woo, but it's great. People always take pictures of every single step that I make and then the final 10, and they want that piece. So when I talk and I show this stuff and then I say, and so I learned step number 3, and comes up. And I think that when it's not there, it's like they hear me, but there's so many words around it that if at least they see the thing, and
yeah.
then the words are around it. But it's like, right, you're not writing 15 lines. Um, yeah, and I mean, what I do is so dependent on, I mean, of course, the sound is really, really important in that part of my work.
Yep.
But in the speaking part of my work, the visual is really important
Oh,
because
yeah.
they don't want to just stare at me. I mean, I know I'm beautiful.
You are.
I know you
I
just,
would play the song right now. You're
everyone wants to be me, but people don't really look at me that much. They look at the pictures and they're always just like, wow, you take such beautiful pictures. And I think that the thing is that in that case, you're not getting the found sound. You're not getting this kind of interesting journey that becomes, I mean, it isn't passive, but you're not following along and told how to experience it. You're doing it in your own space. When you come to a talk, whether you're listening virtually or in person, you're like asking that speaker to lead you.
Yes.
You're in it with them. So it's like a totally different experience. Podcast is one, speaking is another. And so in that case, I do use more visuals because it's like, oh, it's now I see it, or now I get it. I see what you're talking about. And sometimes, you linger on them, but sometimes you kind of go through and they see this series. And so all of this talk about like using them very, very carefully and stuff, I think it really just depends on the speaker. I don't want to just be a travel log, like here's day one and we were in, Christchurch.
Right.
I mean, but by the same token, I want people to feel the sand flies,
Okay.
feel the mud, feel the heat, feel the danger, whatever it happens to be. Yeah.
Speaking of feel, our last segment here on America Public Media Radio will be Alison sharing her thoughts about if you listen to this podcast, what's the one thing you want people to remember by listening to this podcast? Now to Alison.
You're asking me the one thing to take with you if you're listening to this podcast is that all of this beauty and all of these feelings that you're having when you hear particular sounds or are taken to a place are available to you at all times, everywhere. And you just have to be there. You just have to take yourself there and give yourself permission to experience them.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Alison. I put a bunch of links